Characters. They've gotten a lot worse, and I don't think that's an unfair opinion to say. If you've been a long-time player, you've likely experienced an entirely different shift in terms of how 5 stars and 4 star supports and damage dealers are changed. If you're taking a look at my party, you notice I have Wanderer, Venti, Mika, and Yunjin. These are 2 older characters, being Venti and Yunjin, compared to 2 more recent characters with Wanderer and Mika. And I'm only using them as examples because I didn't pull for a lot of units who I know I'm not going to use, like I'll hide them. With that being said, I think it's incredibly important to discuss just why the units now are feeling so lackluster compared to older previous units. And I know Yunjin is not a older unit by comparison. Yunjin was released essentially as a dedicated support for somebody like Yoimiya, or she can also support Razor, she can support Wanderer, and numerous other units himself. But she's nowhere near as old as somebody like Fischl, but I think it's incredibly important to look at the differences between them. I can't and will not try to compare somebody like Fischl to Yunjin because one's a buffer and another one's an off-field damage dealer. And I won't compare Bennett to either one of them because he's an exceptionally different case compared to everybody else. But Yunjin, as a buffer, succeeds for her niche. She's great with Yoimiya, she's great with Wanderer, she's great with anybody who uses normal attacks. So in that same instance, why is Mika not? Well, in this case, I want to specifically boil down to why each of them are great at buffing normal attacks in particular. Mika buffs your normal attack speed, and he also buffs your physical damage. Now, off the rip, this is fine, and his constellations dramatically improve that fact. Taking a look at his C6, that is an incredibly valuable constellation, and the fact that he heals is a bonus on top of this. However, he's lacking specifically in any meaningful way to boost that normal attack damage to make it worthwhile. Attack speed is Yunjin's thing, and she only really unlocks that at C6, but if you're just talking about her at C0, why does she work at least decently well? It's because of essentially her elemental burst. It buffs your damage. One of the benefits, and something that you need to consider when talking about characters, is Yunjin's attack speed bonus is just a bonus. It's an add-on to her already existing buffs. It's not the entirety of her buffs. Bow characters are unique in the sense that they don't have hit lag. This means that regardless of which enemy you're facing off against, they will always attack at the same speed. The same thing for catalyst characters like Wanderer. But with characters like Razor, Eula, or sword characters like Ayaka or Ayato, one of the things you need to look out for is the hit lag. Many of these units will rely inherently on the enemy they're facing off against, so an attack speed bonus for Wanderer and for Yoimiya is going to be drastically more beneficial for each of them in comparison to somebody like Eula, because Eula may either way be slowed down to a small degree. Now, this is just stating off the fact that that exists. This isn't talking about how much value the buffs themselves bring. Eula is a character who wants to build stacks, and so her burst doesn't necessarily have the consistency of others. And yes, attack speed can be useful to her in building up stacks. The problem is, it's not necessarily a damage bonus. The only real bonus you're getting out of Mika is either if you hit multiple enemies with its E, which is going to give you 10% physical damage bonus, or if you have his C6. And the problem with this is, he is a 4-star unit, and so much of his value being locked behind a C6 makes him incredibly difficult for anybody to competently recommend. Because yes, he provides you with healing and a bonus and an attack speed bonus, but ignoring any of that, you could pick up one C0 Raiden and have a 24% bonus damage to use Elemental Burst alongside Superconduct, which essentially would act the same as that physical damage bonus anyway. She would also assist in restoring Eula's burst, meaning that you have more damage overall because you're using her burst more often. If we're looking at supplementing in a cryo character, you could utilize Rosaria or Diona, both units who boost either Eula's defensive capabilities or her overall damage with the physical damage bonus Rosaria provides you with. If I'm taking a look at 5 stars, we have units like Wanderer in comparison to somebody like Zhao. Both of these are decently good units. The problem may be in terms of how you use them and what they require. One of the issues we've seen recently, especially with characters like Sino or like Nilo, is that they require a specific element to work. To a degree, this is something we did see previously. Hu Tao wanted Hydro for Vape, or Child wanted a Pyro unit who could assist them in enabling, though we didn't see it to this degree. Sino basically is locked to Hyper Bloom, Quick Bloom, or Aggravate. And one of the things I've mentioned previously in a different video is that we're getting to a point where a lot of the more recent units are sort of locked to Nahida because she was released so early. And to a degree we saw this with Yamiko, a unit who was just okay, but was much better when Dendro released. That isn't necessarily fine. I don't think anyone likes the idea of summoning for a bad unit who's going to be useful potentially in the future. So yes, to a degree it's easy to look at newer units and say they're bad, but I think it's more important to look at newer units and talk about why they're bad. And what's the consistency among them? You either have units like Sino, Nilo, who are essentially locked to utilizing one specific support, that being Nahida, making Nahida the essential Bennett of Sumeru, or you have 4-star supports such as Mika, who are essentially locked into either being C0 or C6. And if they're C0, they may not be the best unit for the team. Mika isn't the best unit for Eula in a lot of case scenarios. And this is something we saw with Faruzan with the immense energy recharge issues. And this is something we didn't necessarily see with Goro or with Kujosara. So this is a much more recent issue than it previously was. And one of the downsides of this is either they are going to release characters that assist them with those problems or have constellations that actively mitigate them, such as Yamiko's energy recharge issues being mitigated by C1. Yes, units are getting different, but differences between these units and how they play isn't necessarily the same thing as a good unit. I don't want any individual to come into a character saying, oh yeah, they play differently, and think that makes them a good unit. Because if we're speaking objectively, Yoimiya and Hu Tao play very differently. Is one a better unit? Yes, that would be Hu Tao. She deals more damage. But is one easier to play? That's yes, a Yoimiya. If we're talking about buffers, yes, there are some that are way easier to play and way easier to use, but does that make them better or worse than one another? It depends on your perception of that. I don't want Sumeru or Fontaine or Dotline characters to be more difficult to get value out of. I like characters that are good on their own, but can be exceptional in specific scenarios. I use a Melt Ganyu. I know I can also use Freeze Ganyu. Those are options I have. I have double Hydro Hu Tao. I could use double Geo Hu Tao. I can use a Overlord Yoimiya, a Vape Yoimiya, a Monopyro Yoimiya. These are options I have. The issue is, when we're talking about these newer units, they don't have as much flexibility. And we're seeing this weird shift in which people stop talking about, hey, a unit's bad, and instead say, hey, a unit can work. And I'm not saying that's a problem. I don't want people to immediately think that if a unit's bad, ditch them all together. What I want is people to essentially be able and willing to actively have a discussion of, hey, this unit is god-awful, but if you want them to work, here's how. We're in this weird scenario where either a unit is bad and we all mutually agree, like Dea, or we all pretend like a unit is great. And I don't like that, because if you remember back in the early days of Genshin, if a unit was bad, we all agreed they were just bad. For the longest time, Sayu was called the basic discount gene, and she has much more utility than that. But despite how good a lot of units may be, we don't see them either talked about to the same extent as older units, or we see them brushed aside. Bad units are kicked to the curb as opposed to legitimately becoming a talking point in this community. An example being Dori. Does anyone understand this character? I don't like bringing her up constantly, but does anyone know why she exists? Candace. Yes, she has good buffs, but no one to buff. So is it a situation in which we have a bad character, just outright, or is it a situation in which a character will get better over time? I don't know, but is it really fair to tell people, hey, Candace is going to be great, pull her and build her now for later? Or is it safe to say, yeah, she's a bad character, but then when she becomes good, you're suddenly wrong? It's like the weird Kokomi situation, where she was bad on release, and then slowly got better over time with Clamset, now with Dendro. Doesn't mean it was perfectly fine to not say she was bad at release. She was bad at release. But either way, I want to hear your opinions. Do you have a unit that you love and wish was better but isn't actively discussed as being good or bad? Or a unit that you love and adore and wished was better but can't seem to get value out of? Or do you just not care at this point and just pull for whoever you like? I want to know.